So good day, everyone. My name is Brian Prophet. I'm welcome from the Open Source Program Office, and I'm welcoming you to a special edition of Community Central. Um, General housekeeping notes: if you have any questions that you would like to ask our guests, definitely use the Q&A tool. We will be monitoring those, and you can vote on the ones that you really want to hear the answer to, and we will get to the most liked questions during today's session. So with that, I have the great pleasure of introducing to you my colleague from the Open Source Program Office, Dave Neary, who will be moderating today's meeting and panel. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I will start by introducing our panelists today. And we're going to switch to the Brady Bunch view so that you can see all of us. So first, Leslie Hawthorn, who is based in Germany. She's Senior Principal Technical Program Manager with the Open Source Program Office and has many years experience working with open source programs, going back at least a decade. Next up, Rich Bowen, who's based in Kentucky in the United States, who is the CentOS Project Community Manager and also has about 20 years experience working in open source projects. And Carol Chen, who's based in Helsinki, Finland, who is a senior community architect and also has over a decade of experience working on open source projects. So we're fortunate today to have both the experience and the diversity of experiences as well that we have in the panelists. So thank you for joining us. So as we were preparing this, we have decided to things naturally grouped into three themes. One, which we've seen a lot of discussion around, has been logistics, tooling, best practices for working remote, that kind of thing. In fact, that's the area where we're going to focus the least amount of time and effort today. The two other areas where we will be focusing most of our time are the ways in which remote or distributed work actually changes the way that we work and interact as teams and manage teams. And self-care, taking care of yourself during this time, which is, a particularly anxious time for many. How do you balance your needs as a human being with the fact that you're now, under some kind of forced isolation? So I'd like to ask all the panelists to get started. You've all worked remote for many years. Can you remember one thing that you had particular difficulty with, and what you've kind of taken from the experience of working through that? How did you get past it? Let me start with Leslie.
Thanks, Dave. So one challenge that I had when switching from an office job to working remote was reminding myself to switch off working. It's very easy to float by your desk or notice that a message has come in on your phone, and since you have your setup already there, it'll just be really quick if you sit down at the keyboard and flash off a well-thought response, and then 2 hours later you realize that you haven't eaten dinner and perhaps you should be paying attention to your family. So it's really important to set your hours and understand that your work time is your work time and your personal time is your personal time. We all need to be flexible and understanding that our schedules are going to be new and weird and strange if we're working from home now, or if we're working from home with additional family members now. But do make sure to not only focus on your job. If you're, it's very easy when you're getting settled into your new space at home to just stay in that new space, get up, walk around, take your time in the evenings, cook yourself dinner, read a good book, enjoy life.
And I'd really say very much the same thing. When I started working from home full time about 9 years ago, all of our space in the house was full, and my desk was in a corner of our bedroom. And so all night long, the fan was going, there would be random beeps and boops, and you would feel like you're constantly at work. So I would encourage you, like Leslie said, if possible, put your office space physically separate. But sometimes your space doesn't allow that. But mentally, put your office space separate. At the end of the day, close your office door, whether that's physically or mentally. close the office door, turn off your computer, throw a blanket over it, put your papers away, and be home. Because this is not just for your mental health, it's also to ensure that your family doesn't start resenting you being at work 12 hours a day. I also want to say, if you're a manager, this is triply important, because if you answer those emails at 3 o'clock on a Sunday morning, your employees will think that you expect that of them.
Thank you, Rich. Carol, do you have one thing that was particularly difficult for you, and how did you get past it?
Yeah. So for me, it's mainly food and hydration. So, I can just be sitting in front of my computer for hours and forget to eat, sometimes forgetting when it's lunch and also getting enough water. So make sure you have like a good supply of water handy, so you don't have to think about, going to get water. And also, well, maybe in the current situation, it's not as easy, but previously I would make lunch appointments with people I know in the city or working nearby. So I get some kind of, reason to get out for a bit. But now, thankfully, my partner is also working from home now, and he reminds me that now we have to eat lunch every day. So yeah, make sure you get food and hydration.
Rich, you've got a lot of experience, and we see the feather behind you with the Apache project. And Apache is one of those projects that I've always admired in the way that they communicate how to work in a distributed team in an asynchronous way. And I think that's one of the things that's the biggest lesson as we move remote is the importance of changing the way you work, because you don't have that synchronous office time and physical contact all the time. Do you have some specific tips on how you've helped contributors onboard into the Apache project, and some of the lessons from Apache and how work changes as you distribute?
So the biggest thing that I would encourage you to do is remember that now a lot of your communication is in written form. And whereas when you have somebody in front of you, they can read cues. When you're writing something, make sure that you communicate in a way that is going to make sense to them, even if English isn't their first language. They're not picking up your visual cues, and they are missing all of the things that can come across in a physical interaction. The other thing that I would tell you is a mantra that I say all the time in my Apache communities: there is honor in the email not sent. You take the opportunity to write down your thoughts. Don't feel like you have to contribute the last word in every conversation. Give space for other people to communicate, and don't overwhelm things.
We also, as a team, we work across a number of time zones. Can you maybe give some lessons, Carol, in how you've taken some tips in how you change work in that kind of environment where you have a very distributed team?
I think you really have to communicate with your team about what are the expected schedules. And for me, I'm actually less of a morning person, so I tend to start my workday a bit late, close to noon. And because half of my team is based in the US, so I actually tend to have a few meetings in the evenings. But it works for me, but it may not work for everyone. So there needs to be clear understanding and communication between you and your team. When you schedule your team meetings, and when your teammates can expect you to be available throughout the day.
Yeah, it's one of my own personal lessons as well, is kind of having boundaries. So maybe you're not going to work the normal work day. I mean, when I was living in France, I would, up until about 11 a.m., I would have a bit more free time, but I knew that I would be in meetings until 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. And my family adjusted around that. And, Leslie, you've been involved in the Google Summer of Code for at the early stages of that project. And I mean, one of the things that I think is a big lesson from Google Summer of Code is it's helping students, helping people who are unfamiliar with working in open source to get used to that environment. Are there any specific lessons that you would take from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would urge all of us as we're doing more and more online communication, and probably a lot of us are focusing on chat because it gets answers to our questions quickly. To remember, I believe this is an old Apache Software Foundation adage actually. If it doesn't happen on the mailing list, it didn't happen. So if there is information that is vital for your team to understand or that needs to be cascaded and distributed widely, just mentioning it in your team's chat channel is not going to be enough to make sure that everyone is informed. If you make an important decision or a topic comes up where you need to ask folks to be able to weigh in, please do start a thread on your team mailing list or in the appropriate location about that topic. This not only gives people the opportunity to be informed later on, but it also gives people some time to think about how they want to respond. Not all of us are comfortable with instantaneous response. We want to sit back and really cogitate on a topic for a while before contributing. And some folks are more comfortable with long form writing. I've found that to be particularly true at Red Hat. So whatever you're doing to communicate effectively, make sure you replicate that communication in a forum that is easily shared. And again, the great thing about mailing lists is you can always send someone a link to a mailman thread if they need that information later. But I love Threadbot in Google Chat, but it is not the same as a list archive that we know we can all access later. The end. Thanks.
Right. We just got this question in, which I think is appropriate for this particular topic, and that's: do we have any tips when virtually engaging customers around call planning, call duration, gestures, that kind of stuff? Specifically, this is something we discussed when we were preparing this call. Are there ways in which you change meeting schedule and you need to plan for that kind of thing when you're working distributed? Let me go to Leslie.
I think you should go to Rich because he had unmuted, and I'm not 100% certain I understood the question. So
Okay.
since Rich looked poised to respond.
Well, I don't have a lot of interactions with customers. I'm working primarily with community members. But one of the things that I've found in my Apache work is that it is useful to schedule meetings on maybe an alternating week basis, so that some weeks you cater to the people that are in the Indian time zone, or Australia or China, whereas the other weeks you cater to people that are in North America or Europe. Most of our meetings at Red Hat, at least that I'm part of, tend to assume that everyone is in the United States time zones, and this can be very unfair to your colleagues and customers.
One of the things that Leslie, that you mentioned when we were preparing is the need to build in some time between meetings, because so that was why I went to you first. Do you remember?
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I don't remember making that astute point, but now that you've given me the point, my cue, I can go ahead. So one thing that I found to be very valuable when doing my meetings all day, and particularly if you are meeting with customers or external folks where you can't just as easily excuse yourself if you need to, end your meetings 5 to 10 minutes early so you have an opportunity to grab a cup of coffee, take a bio break, stretch your back, even take a quick walk around outside to get a breath of fresh air, because if we don't build in that time, what we're going to find is we are consistently rushed throughout the day, physically uncomfortable, not able to focus on our work and what we're supposed to be achieving together. So Google Calendar if you are a Google Calendar user, has a very convenient feature in settings called Use Smart Meetings, and if you book a half an hour, it will automatically book 25 minutes. So making regular use of that feature at times like these may be very helpful for you.
I was not aware of that feature.
Right.
Go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Yeah. So especially for, I myself also don't have many interactions with customers, but I think for any kind of important meetings that you might schedule, you will want to, take like 5-10 minutes before the meeting to make sure that everything is working correctly, because you don't want the first impression to be spending 5-10 minutes during the meeting figuring out audio problems or any technical issues. So, I think actually that relates to also giving us some breaks between the meetings, so you have time to do that, to take care of issues and things that you might not foresee. So.
Thank you. So we do have also a couple of questions related to office equipment. This is something that we touched on briefly in our preparation. Rich, you had a particular. The question is, do you have a particular ergonomic office chair that you like and would recommend? If so, what brand and model? We spoke about this during the prep call, so maybe you want to address this general topic.
Well, I'm going to answer the question by not answering it. If you're suddenly, unexpectedly on work from home, you need to remember that this is temporary. We hope this is temporary. We believe this is temporary. Don't go out and spend thousands of dollars on equipment that is going to sit idle when we get back to our real lives. If in 3 months you still have that question, I would be delighted to share with you various things. Really, the only thing that I would encourage you to spend money on at this point in the game is headphones and a microphone, because you're going to be having more remote meetings. But don't go spend a bunch of money on new toys at this point.
I agree.
Thank you. I think that's good insight.
I don't actually. Oh, sorry. I probably should raise my hand.
No, go ahead, Carol.
Okay. I don't actually have like a so-called ergonomic chair. Which actually makes me kind of get up more often and move to different places in my apartment to work. So I don't get, if it's actually too comfortable, I might just be stuck here for the whole 8-10 hours, whatever. So, but headphones are so important because like Rich mentioned, we're on online meetings probably more often now than ever before. So, wearing this for several hours a day, you want to get a good pair of headphones.
Leslie?
Other than, once again, echoing the really good set of headphones, the only other thing that I would urge folks to do is if you are a coffee drinker and you are now working from home, take a moment to invest in figuring out your coffee setup, because if you are like me, it is deeply important to you to be able to walk to, yes, thank you, Dave. It is deeply important to you to be able to get your cup of joe quickly, efficiently in between meetings and to enjoy it and to keep up your energy. Because my days start early here in Europe and then I tend to be up late in the evenings. So coffee is a necessity. And my apologies to all of my coworkers who have to deal with my very fast voice at the end of the day when I'm highly caffeinated.
Okay, so I want to switch topics a little bit to the human side of working remote. So one of the things that I've heard many people say is, I'm starting to go stir crazy. How am I going to maintain my mental health during working at home? I don't have any contact with people anymore. As remote workers, what are some of the things that you have done to maintain that balance, both family work balance and also third places, people outside of family and work? How do you get out of the house? And maybe that's not the best advice that we can give now, but general advice on the importance of having a third place to go to. Rich, do you want to kick us off on this topic?
I do. I want to give all of you explicit permission to be human, if you're in the office, you walk out your door, you talk to people that aren't on your team, you have conversations. You need to keep doing that. Slack is one place where you can create a free workspace and invite the friends that you would have met at the water cooler and have irrelevant conversations, have conversations about things that are not work. This is essential for your mental health, to continue these relationships that you had before. I must admit that the cameo a moment ago when my daughter came in was staged, but I wanted to make a point that your family might be home too, and you need to make sure to continue connecting with them. Now, there's two aspects of this. One is that there's a phrase that I say every single week: I'm at work right now. I will get back to you when I'm home. I will be home at 5 p.m. And setting clear boundaries for your family is important there. but also take a moment to go downstairs and give her a hug, invite her in your office. And third thing I want to say on this topic is a lot of us are much more emotional now than we were 2 weeks ago. Be compassionate for your coworkers. Give them permission to be emotional. Start meetings with, how are you doing? How are you dealing with this? Take the time to allow people to be human and to cry, because this is a time that's very difficult for many of us and will continue to become even more difficult as time goes by.
It's interesting that three of us had, from the time we started preparing for this call, had interruptions before we. So it's yes, we're all in a new situation for sure. Carol, do you have any specific tips on that third, on that maintaining balance?
I think sure. Even for some of us who have been working from home for a long time, this has been quite a change because, for example, for me, I'm traveling about 40 to 50% of the time. That used to be my social kind of aspect of my work. So the working from home is actually a good balance for that. Now I'm home pretty much 100% of the time because all our events for the next 2-3 months are canceled or postponed. So even for us, there's a kind of adjustment and a change. So we have to remind ourselves, spend more time with family members. Of course, we can't go out with friends. I mean, at least it's discouraged right now. So, but pick up the phone, chat with them, ask them how they're doing. And I actually appreciate a lot of my friends doing that. So, do the same for your family members and friends. And sometimes just stepping out to the balcony for like a few minutes makes a big difference. Get some fresh air, and that'll help you feel better. At least it does for me. So.
Leslie, do you have some examples of things that people have been doing in your entourage during this particular time to kind of create social spaces, virtual social spaces?
Absolutely. So one thing that I have been experimenting with myself is actually differentiating between physical distancing and social distancing. So right now I'm making sure that I stay physically distant from other people for my own health and to help with theirs. But from a social perspective, like I know how much my social network and the support of people that I love is important to me right now. So if someone had told me a few weeks ago that I would spend 1 to 2 hours every morning on the phone talking to friends, I would have told them that they were quite silly and that I don't particularly enjoy phone calls. But here we are, and I've really been having quite a lot of joy and satisfaction in reconnecting with folks that I hadn't talked to in a long time. We would keep up by text or by email, but now we schedule 15 minutes just to chat, understand what's going on in their area. It's an opportunity to balance the things we hear on social media that may be overblown or strange or odd with just the reality that our friends are doing well, and that all is fine with them, be they close by or somewhere far away, and just making sure to take that social time that is not work related and to enjoy it. Right? We as Rich mentioned very early in this call, right? This is temporary. We're going to be able to go back to a situation in which we won't be making these connections using long distance tools. But for now, like, we should absolutely be maintaining those social ties and keeping up those connections. They're important to our health and well-being.
I've seen so many great ideas, from virtual lunches and dinners where people are setting up, group chats and video calls with people in different places. Netflix watch parties coupled with group chats where people are watching the same film and commenting on it at the same time. I've also seen a friend of mine on Facebook who just asked the question, can you let me know the last time we spoke in person? And it's been a real conversation starter for, wow, has it been that long? We need to check in. So yeah, I think that point that you make about, differentiating between social distancing and physical distancing, that we actually require the social contact more now is a really good one. And that's always something when I worked remote that I had, I really struggled with, and I made sure that I always had those social groups and appointments outside of the house that kind of kept me sane and allowed me to have that, basically just to be mobile and to maintain some mental health. Okay, let's go back to Q&A. So I'm going to answer this one myself. 3 out of 4 of us are wearing headphones. One of us, that's me, is wearing earbuds. What's the advantage to earbuds? So for me, it's the same. I use noise cancelling Bose earbuds. They're the same ones I bring with me when I'm traveling. So portability is the only advantage. They actually do get uncomfortable after a while in my ears, so I try not to have them all day. So that one we can answer very quickly. And this one brings us back to the way we work a little bit more. Asynchronous communication and work is highly relevant with folks spread across time zones, whether you work remotely or not. Do you have any tips from your experience in how you can make this work and help people feel engaged as a team, despite maybe not being able to make the meeting? Leslie, this was something that you made a couple of really good points about in prep. Would you like to take this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I think is particularly important at all times, but especially as we are now switching up our working patterns, and it's important that we really communicate clearly and effectively with one another, is if you're going to be having meetings, please take the time to, if you can, 24 hours before, publish a meeting agenda that is very specific. And the reason for this is that participants then know if maybe they want to wait up a couple of extra hours, even though it's time zone inconvenient for them, so that they can participate. And they also understand if they need to leave any notes in the agenda document to make sure any point of view they have is represented, even if they are not able to be on the call. The other reason that you want to do this is for the sake of graciousness to your attendees who are dealing with different life circumstances right now. I am now newly home with a 4-year-old who should be in daycare, and there are times where if I don't essentially need to be in a meeting, I skip it because I understand that spending that hour running around with her outside means that later on in the afternoon for meetings, I can't skip. She's quieter and she's chilled out. So helping people to ruthlessly prioritize their time when they're in a situation where they have less mental bandwidth and maybe less ability to concentrate, anything you can do to help them ease that cognitive load is great. And then again, good meeting hygiene at all times, but again, important now, please publish notes afterwards. You don't necessarily need to publish a recording. Although many people like recording, some people would prefer a really quick decisions and action items list published afterwards so that folks can quickly absorb what they weren't there to see in person. And yeah, like just generally speaking, this is good stuff to do, but it's particularly important now as we're all having different schedules, different needs, etc. Take a few minutes to add a few more words to folks' lives and help them know, where they can orient themselves based on the information you're sharing. Thanks.
I'd like to group. There's a second part to that question is how do you keep a team engaged? And there's another question here. For a team that is or was seated together, a lot of communication happens in person. Its availability signaling is based on body language, whether somebody's wearing earphones or not. What might be the substitutes for that, if any? So this is, I think, going back to the water cooler point that Rich, you made earlier. Carol, do you want to how does your team communicate availability, not availability, maintain that kind of group dynamic, given that you work distributed?
First, I want to address what Leslie just said, which is I think it's very important about the agenda for meetings, but applied to a chat scenario, because now that most of us are working remotely, I think there's so much more use of chat programs, whether it's Google Chat or Slack or whatever, Telegram. Okay, I have like 10 chat apps on my phone. So please be considerate, like when you prompt, when you send a message to someone, my pet peeve is just somebody who say hi and not follow up with any question or statement. Get to the point. what are you asking me about? Is it something related to work? Is it just asking me how we're doing, which I really appreciate? But it also helped me prioritize. Do I need to address this now? Am I, I usually take some time, in between meetings or tasks, to answer chat messages. But if it's urgent, then it will help me to prioritize that if needed. So just having a high really is like having no agenda for a meeting. It's not helpful.
Right.
Getting to how our team works. My team is actually very distributed. I think most of us work from home and in 6 different time zones or something. Okay, maybe not that many, but across 2 continents. So we have this Slack channel that it's kind of like our water cooler, where throughout the day we have messages and things like that. So if your group is now newly kind of remote, where you used to be more in present in the office, perhaps set up some similar channels where you can just drop in any time of the day to chit chat, ask how everyone is doing and things like that. I'm sure there's other ways to do that, but this is how my team does it.
We also have that in the open source program office. We use Google Chat, but the tool is really not the important thing. The important thing is having some place where you have as a group a place to communicate and share availability information. Like, I'm heading out to the doctor now. I have a doctor's appointment. I won't be around for the next 2 hours. Is the kind of message you see regularly on our chat. Leslie, and then I'll go back to Rich afterwards.
Yeah, one thing that I do want to urge is that folks feel like when they're chatting with their teammates and giving them updates about where things are at, that folks feel like that's about communicating information and not about check-ins or being monitored or feeling like anyone's ever looking over their shoulder. That was a really strange feeling changing from an office to working at home, because we're very used to people observing us in physical space in an office. So I often felt like if I was going to run to go to the grocery store before it closed, I needed to tell someone I'm going to be away from keyboard for 25 minutes. And, well, no one cares. You should go to the grocery store and get your groceries, and don't feel like anyone is observing you or judging you, etc. You're sharing information about what's going on, just letting people know about the fluidity of their day is great. No one is judging you. You get done what you can done when you can get it done, and you get it done well.
Rich?
So for the most part, we're not recommending specific tools. And I know that some of the people listening don't like Google, but here at Red Hat, Google Calendar is our calendaring tool. And it is the way that our teams know when we're available and when we're not. We don't need to know what you're doing, but we do need to know when you're available. So I really encourage you to keep your calendar up to date. If you have a doctor's appointment, block out that time. We don't need to know where you're going, but we need to know you're not available. A phrase that I've heard recently is telegraph intent. Over communicate even that you're not going to be available or that you are, what times are better.
Yeah, I think that general point of over communication becoming that much more important, because people don't see what you're doing, and also over communication from the point of view of managers communicating with their teams. That's you're not going to have the drive-by management opportunities that you have usually just to check in on people. So changing tack once again. Let me see. We have many questions. Okay, we'll stay on the topic of making the best use of your time. We have a question: how do you stay motivated and make the best use with your unstructured time, where you should do things but don't have a scheduled time or hard deadline to get it done? So I guess this is not a specific working from home issue, but I guess when you're in the office, you have office hours, you have a general rhythm to the week. You've got a team check-in meeting at a certain time and you've got to get something done by then and whatnot. How do you, when you're remote, obviously those kinds of things are less of an issue, and we often see in job descriptions for remote employees that you need to be self-motivated, which is often code for ready to work very hard and long hours. But that's neither here nor there. But how do you, as a remote worker, how do you structure your time, and how do you make sure you stay focused? What kind of tools and techniques do you have? Leslie.
So I like to use my unstructured time by providing myself structure. So I will block out specific project work time on my calendar, and I will even assign it to a specific task. So if I, for example, know that I need to review a Google document and provide feedback by Friday, I'll block out an hour on Wednesday to make sure that I actually do that. And then that also gives me a little bit of wiggle time, because if some unforeseen circumstance comes up, I still have Thursday and possibly some time on Friday to get that work done. And by blocking that time on your calendar to make sure you actually accomplish the things that you need to get done each day, one, you actually get to them, but two, you find yourself, again, able to spend that time really prioritizing on your top 1, 2, 3 items. You can't drop more than, say, 2 or 3 1-hour blocks on your calendar to get work done every day and still be functional. So then, that helps you understand these are the things that must get done today. Everything else, if I need a little bit of extra runway, that's okay.
Dave, you're muted.
Yes, I am. I'm not anymore. Carol, do you have any particular productivity tips? So we just checked off a remote meeting bingo card there. I think that's the first time that's happened this year.
For me, I would actually say I tend to overcompensate. I'm not the most organized person, I'll admit that. And when I first started remote working, I'm always worried that, am I doing enough? Will people think that I'm just lazing off at home or something? So there's a tendency for some remote workers to work too much. And I think it's always, so having structure definitely helps, but also remember to take breaks, because it's just so easy to, like I said, sit in front of the computer and forget what time it is. And so having breaks, and also basically remind ourselves that, it's work is important, but general well-being is, has to come first. You have to be feeling well before you can, contribute your most to the work. So I would say, like, in these past 2 weeks, I have been a bit kind of thrown off balance, even though I'm used to working from home, but, worrying about my teammates, other people that I know that has these new adjustments to make, and that also affected me. So just take breaks and schedule, some time to make yourself feel better, and just as we schedule meetings, just make sure that that's taken care of. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I've personally scheduled some time to plan in my calendar, and that's for many years, because even though I've been working in the Westford office, I'm part of a distributed team, so kind of planning my own time. And I know there are a number of people who do that, but I put an hour every Friday afternoon where it's like, this is where I think about the week that's passed and what I need to get done next week. Leslie, you had your...
I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but when in talking about blocking out time on my calendar, I'm also really clear to block out time for things like lunch and preparing food, because that takes time, particularly if you're now cooking for more human beings in your house and you used to just like pop a pizza in the oven and go. And also time for walks. So I get a reminder on my calendar that tells me that I am going to go and take a 15-minute or half-hour walk, and then I'm getting up, I'm getting out of my chair, I'm getting fresh air, and I'm able to get out and about. If you're not able to get out and about for whatever reasons, get up, stretch. There's some really great videos on YouTube of people being able to like do all these crazy stretches, no matter how not physically active they are. So if I, Leslie Hawthorn, can do these stretches, you can too, I promise you. Block time on your calendar to do it. Keep your body healthy.
You also mentioned a great idea of, if you have one-on-one meetings and that kind of thing, those don't necessarily have to be at a desk. You can do walk and talk meetings, especially if you have good earphones. Yes, Rich.
So when you're in an office, you have almost unconscious accountability to the people that are around you. You don't spend your time playing Fortnite at your computer because you know that somebody's going to see over your shoulder. I try to build in this kind of accountability by scheduling time to talk to people. Have a one-on-one meeting with your manager. And if you're a manager, be intentional about having these meetings with your reports. But it's not just with my manager. I have throughout the week probably 4 different one-on-one meetings with coworkers just to check in, be accountable. I find that reciting out loud what my goals are for the week, what I've been working on, what I'm struggling with, really keeps me accountable and keeps me on task. And you know yourself better than I do, but another thing that I do is every morning I write out my to-do list on paper, and that jogs it in my mind, and it helps me prioritize the things that are important and discard the things that are not.
So there's this really interesting question here, which I'm going to throw this out as a general question to everybody. I really like it. I'm not sure how y'all are going to answer it. So it's been mentioned, and it's even been mentioned in this call, that this is temporary, but shouldn't we also try to get something out of it? What kind of ways can we grow through this experience? Like, we should improve our personal situations by it right now, it seems, at least to some extent, and I think it would be more worthwhile to point out how we can grow with the situation rather than just frame it as temporary. Leslie.
Thank you so much for asking this question. I think that one of the most important things that all of us can learn together in this situation is to work really hard on our communication skills and be much more effective when talking to each other. So if you are not familiar with techniques like mirroring, which is repeating back what someone has said to you in a different way so that you ensure you have mutual understanding, or many other topics which are covered under the umbrella of nonviolent communication, please take the opportunity to read up on these topics and to practice these techniques. I know that for some of my coworkers, we will have meetings that last 20 minutes longer than I think they need to, because we are doing that work to do the back and forth dialogue to make sure we finally get to a common understanding, and then it's so much better because otherwise we spend a lot of time talking past each other, disengaging in meetings, waiting for the call to conclude instead of actually benefiting from one another's experience and knowledge and getting stuff done. So I'll drop some links in chat for some of the phrases that I just used.
To add to that, I think this increased kind of empathy and understanding towards each other is something we should carry on even after this whole thing blows over. Yeah, like when I receive a "How are you doing today?" out of a sudden from somebody I have not talked to for more than a year, that was really nice feeling. But hey, why wait for something like that to happen to reach out to people? So I hope to see that continuing even after this temporary thing ends.
To expand even on what Carol said there, when you are not in the room with somebody, being very intentional about getting to know them as a human and not just as somebody that's working on a task with me. Trying to, and this is difficult for those of us that are very introverted, but going out of your way to engage with the person as a human. On the opposite side of that, here's an opportunity for you to identify meetings that should have been emails. We all attend a lot of meetings that could have been avoided if somebody had taken Leslie's advice and written an agenda before the meeting. Because when you take the time to write the agenda, it's possible that the entire meeting can have a one email answer and not take an hour of your time.
And I will add my own grain of salt on the topic, which is a lot of the things that we've talked about here around written communications, facilitating asynchronous collaboration. These are just really best practices for working in a global company. And I think this is really going to be an opportunity for some teams to open themselves up to working better outside of their team with people who are not in the same physical location. So I'm hopeful that this will be a growth opportunity in terms of learning those techniques for working distributed. Yes, Rich.
I'll just say something really quickly about that. In the open source and program office, we tend to work more outside of our team than we do within our team. We tend to build these links across teams. And here's your opportunity to do this when you're working remotely. Find the best person to talk to, not necessarily the person that used to sit next to you, but the person that sits across the planet from you. They might be the best input on the thing that you're struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we're coming into the home stretch of the panel. There's a couple of questions here. Any good resources on topics for communication techniques that Leslie just mentioned? I would suggest that we'll answer that there may be a document that we can put together, a blog post that we can point to. But yes, that's something that we will answer in terms of, because it's book references, we'll put together a resource for that after the meeting. And we have a question for communication tools like Slack. Some people put their real picture in the profiles. Does that help in building a relationship with the client or with the rest of your team? To that, I would add, video chat rather than audio chat also helps put a human face on the people we're dealing with. So I would say that does help. And for the last few minutes, I am going to, several of us have children of various ages, and we have one question here. And there have been a lot of resources that have been pointed out here. Do you have any tips on engaging children? So I know we have younger children, we have teenagers, and we have middle school or elementary school age children on this call. Do you have any tips on keeping your children engaged with fun software courses or exercises? How advice on homeschooling, open source, of course. So I added the homeschooling piece, but I know that it's been a general topic. Any particular advice on how you've kept your kids occupied and maintained your sanity and not expelled any of your homeschool students in the first few days?
So I'd like to say that I live in the best school district in the world, and so I have an advantage here. Our teachers are very engaged, but if that hasn't been your experience, do reach out to your teachers. Take this opportunity to really engage with your students' teachers and ask them for advice, ask them for things to work on if they haven't proactively given you that.
I have tried to front load the day with activities for my daughter so that she's more tired out in the afternoon when meetings start off with the US East Coast. Some days are more successful than others in getting her tired out and less distracting. But the other thing, I just want to point back to something that Rich said earlier, which is, we live in tender times. This is a new situation for all of us, and as much as we want to make sure that we're productive at work, this is hard on our family members. This is hard on our small humans. This is hard on the elders who may be at home in our care. And if they are coming to us with need, most of the time, email can wait. You can take a quick pause from that call you're having with your coworker to really be present and let them know when you are going to be available to them, be that in 10 minutes or an hour. Our loved ones need us, and they need us to be present with them. And it is okay to give them that time when they need it. You need to set clear boundaries and make sure you get your work done. But there is nothing to say that if in the middle of writing an email that you're trying to figure out how to word perfectly, your child comes to you and wants to go outside and blow on a dandelion, go do it. You will never regret making that decision. Thanks.
My personal experience, and I will happily share a link to the Scratch project that my 12-year-old has put together this week, has been that Scratch is awesome. There are a ton of Scratch tutorials on YouTube. There are a ton of learning resources available on scratch.mit.edu. And I will be sharing my 12-year-old Scratch game. It's a platformer. It's his very first one. It's got collision detection. It's got gravity. It's got a whole ton of really nice stuff in it. And he's very proud. So if you all see the link on the OSPO channel after this call and like it, I would be grateful for that. Yeah, Scratch, Arduino, let me see, and the Khan Academy Coder coding programming module is particularly great as well. Those are the three that I would point out. Okay, so we're about at wrap up. We've talked quite a bit about best practices for working remote. We've talked quite a bit about the way that remote and distributed work changes. And we've also talked quite a bit about self-care, the human side of working at home. To wrap up, is there anything that each of our panelists would like to add on any particular aspect of working remote in this time, or managing people in different places? How do you, as community leaders, identify and help the people who are struggling the most with this transition?
I'll go first because I had something.
Yeah, let's start with Carol.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll go first. Well, first I want to add to the previous topic about kids, even though I don't have kids, but I remember when I was growing up, my dad always involved me he brought me to conferences. He brought me to those industrial events and things like that. He talked to me about what he's doing, even though I don't understand half the time, but he actually got me interested and kind of set on this path towards working in this industry. So, sometimes just talking to your kids, even though they probably won't understand more than half of what you're saying, but it gets them involved and they feel, like they are connected to you in that way. At least that's how I felt when my dad shared his work stuff with me. So, it's a way it doesn't have to be always something that they have to understand or learn from, but in the process, they could probably learn something. And that's always a nice thing to have. So, and also, we talk about rubber duck programming and where you can do the same with your kids and they're actually alive and they're responsive and, it could help in part of your work as well. Who knows? So I think overall, we just have to wrap up the topic. More understanding, especially in this time, not just from us to each other, but for example, if you're managing a team, know that people would need maybe more time to adjust to the new circumstances. And even for those who have been working remotely, they are adjusting to their partners or their family members being in the same situation. And so just more communication, more understanding, and good luck to everyone.
I just remembered one of my favorite kind of introduction to programming tasks for young kids was based on a YouTube video I saw of a dad who asked his kids to describe the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then pedantically followed the instructions that they gave him. So if they said put peanut butter on one side of the bread, he would put it on the side of the bread, for example. And it's just hilarious, and it kind of really introduces you to the idea that a computer is just a pedantic executor of instructions.
I saw that one too. Yeah,
it's awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in the interest of following our own best practices, thank you, panelists. Thank you for everybody who attended this session. I think we should wrap it up here. Thank you, Rich, Carol, Leslie, and I will hand it back to Brian.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you all very much for sharing your input and your great questions here on Community Central. For those of you who are interested, all of the links that have been mentioned by our panelists and also within our chat channel and in the Q&A tool, these will all be posted in our internal internet within Red Hat and also on the YouTube page for the public video version of this recording. So we definitely will get those resources out to everybody. So with that, I'd like to thank Dave, Rich, Carol, and Leslie, all fantastic colleagues to work with over the years in our home environments. We certainly appreciate their knowledge and insight. So thank you all. And
thanks for having us.
Yeah, and with that, we are going to wrap up this edition of Community Central. Stay tuned for more Community Centrals coming up later on this coming month. And until then, everyone stay safe and be well.